Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis. At the end, the conclusion of Ayin Beis, which is page 1477. So as we discussed yesterday, let me take this now to the next stage of elaborating and developing the ideas here discussed in Ayin Beis. As we know, we only have Ad Kan Nimtze Beguf Yad Kedesh. Till here we have what the Rebbe Rashab wrote. Most likely, he finished writing this definitely in 1918, Tafresh Ayin Ches. Remember, the Hemshech began in Tafresh Ayin Beis, 1912. Shavuos is when he began delivering it, which he probably began writing it before that. So this is around 1918. We know that because the Rebbe Rashab writes in a number of places. He refers to a Maimorim from that year, Tafresh Ayin Ches. Just the most recent example was on page 1475, but other places as well. So mid-1918. Could have continued writing maybe 1919, maybe even 1920. But he doesn't have any indications that he did, meaning he doesn't refer to any Maimorim from those years. So we don't know exactly whether he could have been writing it to the last day. Remember, the stalkus of the Rebbe Rashab was Beis Nissen, right before Pesach in the year 1920, Tafresh Pei, which would be 1920. Okay. What we do know is that the third volume was only written and never delivered, and it corresponded to after the Rebbe Rashab left Lubavitch due to World War I breaking out. So Lubavitch was closer to the front lines, so he retreated back to more inland, more inner Russia, Soviet Union, which was the city of Rostov. Parsha Vayera Tafresh Ayin Vov would be the last Shabbos that he was in Lubavitch. And that's the last mimer we have, the end of volume 2. Volume 3 continues the Hemshech, but he no longer is delivering it. Therefore, it's also not broken down in Maimorim. As this whole thing that we've learned from the beginning of this volume goes back to the beginning, page 1207, all the way here to 1477. It's only written. It's called the Chelik Shalei Nemar. Sometimes it's referred to, the Rebbe Rashab refers it, and the Rabbeim referred to the part that was not said, which means it wasn't delivered Baal Peh on a Shabbos or Yom Tov and so on. But he did write it. But as I said, it wasn't finished. So what I'm going to do now, and you can list this if you want to write it down, you can write it down. Or anyway, I'm going to go over what are the themes that the Rebbe Rashab did not finish, that he began discussing earlier in Ayin Beis, and I'll refer to the actual pages. So the first thing is simply laying out what are ideas that were not completed. So we know that we need to complete them. And as I said, a lot of it we'll be able to find out from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer that the Rebbe Rashab actually cited the Alter Rebbe's Maimer back on page 1352, and that will help us understand some of these ideas. But I'm going to go over even beyond that, things that I found throughout the Hemshech, going back, things that the Rebbe Rashab began and did not finish. So that will give us at least an understanding of what we need to cover. So we'll begin with that. And, okay. So what we've learned so far is, what we've concluded so far is the understanding of the hisbonenus, the contemplation of Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem Kved Malchus Leilam Vod, or in Shema Yisrael itself, Hashem Elokeinu and Hashem Echad, which he refers to two levels of Yichud. Yichud Elah, Yichud Tata. Yichud Allah is the perspective of the divine, as meaning from how the divine looks at it all, which is everything is nullified, and all that exists is bittul b'mitzias, everything is completely buttal. Yichud Tata is looking at everything from the divine through the lens of the divine within existence. And within existence, bitla yesh. So you do come to sublimating and aligning ourselves, but bitla yesh. So these are two levels of yichud. These two levels of yichud that we learned join together because there's the yichud of the two yichudim. Liyachid, beis gam beis yichudim. That both of them, from the perspective of Atzmus, are one, are all part of Atzmus. Because they both originate from the same source, even though initially you can't discern between them. That's why you need the tzimtzum and the parsa. They will break down to two tracks, but fundamentally, as they are in their source, they're all one with Atzmus. And that oneness also transfers over to the way they are within existence. However, that's the work that we need to do. And that's the yichud that we have to achieve. This theme began on page 1466. The bottom of 1466 is where the Rebbe Rashab began to discuss Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem. But he didn't just discuss it in a vacuum. First of all, this theme has already been going on for a while, Kol HaMayrich Be'echad. We've been talking about the contemplation and elaborating the Echad, the Achdus, recognizing Achdus in everything. Achdus Hashem. That was a big theme of what the neshama comes down below to achieve that goal of recognizing Achdus Hashem. This goes back to Shema, and in order to help us get there, we have Birchas Yetzer, which is the Avodah of the Malachim. That is a siyua that prepares us and primes us to get to Shema. Shema is the ultimate yichud, but the Malachim in Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah help, or especially in Bria, help us get there. That's part of what was discussed earlier. The whole idea of the difference between the neshamas as they come down Lamata and they need that support. That in turn followed the whole discussion of Riyah, that the eye to see needs an outside light. Can't see on your own, even though the power of the eye is able to see, and the Osad Love, the power of the eye, will be able to see without an external light. We'll soon get back to that as I'm mentioning it very intentionally. But the topic of the two levels of Yichud and uniting the two began on page 1466 in the second paragraph, and it came following the topic of Ner Mitzvah V'Torah Eir, which followed the concept of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, which really began all the way back in page 1350. But in 1463, he returned to that topic, the three things in the Ner, the Psila, which is the divine soul as it manifests in the body, is the wick. The Shemen is the Chochmah, is the wisdom of the animal soul that you want to transform to fuel, that will fuel the divine soul, the wick. And the flame it creates is the fire of godliness, the love and light, divine light and the divine flame that is created by the animal soul being transformed through the divine soul. That's what we discussed. Talk about that more detail as well. So he said, so there on page 1466, and here's the first topic that the Rebbe Rashab asked, he did not answer. I'm going backwards. The latest topic first, and then I'm going to go back and develop and see what bigger themes have not been addressed or not completely addressed. So the Rebbe Rashab asks a question there. He says, how can the soul affect a bittul, a sublimation, a nullification, a refinement of the animal soul, which is b'teikef hayeshes? The animal soul is all about its intensely self-oriented. Yesh. The nega of klippas nega, the transparent with a bright klippa, but it's a klippa. Klippas nega, like it explains in Tanya at the end of chapter 1, the nefesh habamis comes from klippas nega. Klippas nega is not gedusha. Klippas nega is covering up. Hepech habitl legamri. It's antithetical to bitl. So how does the soul impact bitl on a nefesh habamis, which is completely not receptive to it? That question is not answered. That's when the Rebbe Rashab said, Yesh lahagdim tchila inyan krishma. To understand that, we have to first preface the inyan of krishma. And he goes into Parsha Shena that says, V'hafta b'chol v'avech b'shnei tzorech, that that's through the yichud elyon, but posek rishon, v'sheni krishma, and b'shma, baruch shem, It says Yichud Eloh, Yichud Ato, and then afterwards says or Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad in Shema itself. So you see clearly here that this whole topic from there, which goes all the way to basically 11 pages, from 1466 to 1477, where we concluded Ayin Beis, is all coming to explain Shema in order to explain the Vahafta of how you cause bittul, how the neshama can cause bittul to the animal soul. So what do we know? That the Rebbe Rashab gave a long 11-page explanation on the bittul of Yichud Eloh and Yichud Tata, but he didn't finish and say, okay, now we'll understand how that leads to Vahafta, that the animal soul, and answering the question, how the animal soul, which is fundamentally a yesh, how does it ultimately achieve Vahaftas Hashem Elokecha b'chol avavcha b'shnei yitzurecha? So that's one thing that has not been spelled out. Now, could we speculate? We could speculate, but thank God, this is all based on the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe in the Maimorim of Chanukah in Torah Eir Miketz, Chanukah, and the Rebbe Mittler Rebbe's elaborate explanation of 70-page Maimer from the Mittler Rebbe on this topic. And there, he also brings the whole beer of Shema and Baruch Shem, but then the Mittler Rebbe continues, the Alter Rebbe and Mittler Rebbe at length actually do continue and say, based on this whole understanding of Yichud Eloh, Yichud Tata, and the Yichud of the two, will now understand how, excuse me, how you affect bittul in the Nefesh Habamis. So there's no question, since the Rebbe Rashab is basing his Maimer here with much more elaboration, even than the Mittler Rebbe, that the basis of it would be taken from those Maimorim. So looking there, we'll be able to, combining with what we learned here, we'll be able to understand the answer to this question. And we will get there. Right now, I'm listing the questions that need answering, or the topics or themes that have not been completely, the knots have not been tied. Rebbe Rashab did not round it all out. And we know the Rebbe Rashab, we see clearly many topics he begins, could be hundreds of pages earlier, or tens of pages, and then come back and finishes it. That's number one. Number two is a previous question right before that. The line on top of that, he asked a different question. So there he says, like this, that when neshama comes down below, even though it needs the support of the malachim, birchas yetzer, like we said, that the malachim and their inspiration and their fiery passion helps serve as a role model and a motivation and a motivator to the neshama, which means taking the fuel of the shemen that will in turn feed the psila, the wick, which is the divine soul inside the body. We learn that itself, even though it's getting the support from an outside light, the malachim, but at the end of the day, who is with the flame itself, even it's being lit and ignited from an outside source, but it itself is burning. It itself is affecting the shemen. So the psila is drawing from the oil, like we learned at length. It draws from the oil the wisdom of the animal soul, and with that, it turns it into divine fire and divine light and divine love. So it's coming to the neshama. So ask the Rebbe Rashab another question. Why is it dafka with the power of the soul? And that question too is not answered directly. So this too will find the answer in the Maimorim of the Mittler, the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe. Two. Next. And tell me if anybody wants to ask anything while I'm laying this out. I mean, I'm not explaining things. I'm just really laying out the questions here. The next one is at the beginning of the paragraph. He said, just like we said, Ner Mitzvah.
What page is this?
1466.
Okay, I'm taking notes. That's
what Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, that the neshama of a person is compared to a flame. he said the second pasuk says ner mitzvah v'teira eir, that a mitzvah is also compared to a flame, to a candle. And it also has, therefore, three things: shemen, oil, psila, wick, and the oil, the light that it creates. So he says, "V'lohaven ma'u inyan ner mitzvah." What is the inyan of the ner mitzvah? What is its function? If the neshama is already a flame, a candle, and the neshama does this avodah, and we just said the way it does it is through these bananus, b'chis yetzer, then shema, that brings to v'hafta. So what exactly is ner mitzvah? And ma hema gimel inyanim hanal. And what are these three things? The gimel inyanim of ner in ner mitzvah, the three things: the wick, psila, the oil, or the fuel, and the fire that it creates, or the light, the fire it creates. That too he did not spell out. So that too we will find the answer in the Maimarim of the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, the Chanukah Maimarim that I'm referring to. So there you have three things already that the Rebbe Rashab began on page 1466 and did not conclude. But as I said, thank God we have those Maimarim and they will help us understand it. Okay. I'm going to move back now for more subjects that the Rebbe Rashab began and did not finish. But let me stop again. Anybody wants to ask anything? Okay. Now we move our way backwards. So, 1 second. As I pointed out in 1463, he returned to what he began speaking about in 1350, page 1350. Right? So I want to go back now. The next subject is the power of Riyah. You may recall on page 1352, you go to 1352, he said, to understand this whole idea of the wick, these three things in the Neshama and in a mitzvah, and also understand Torah Er, which we'll discuss soon as well, he said, Nidali Levaira Inyan Apimasha Kosa B'Mokam. I'm reading from page 1352, the Inyan Er Hariyah. So Er Hariyah, the light of the vision, of eyesight, became a prominent theme all through these pages. And then he returned to it on page 1398 and 1454 and 1462. Yeah. And discussed it in many, many details. So it's pretty clear to me that the Rebbe Rashab did not, even though he said a lot, and most of it is pretty clear at this point, but it seems to me, because it's so critical in understanding this whole process of the neshama coming down below, and just like the power of vision below in a keli, it needs the siyua, it needs the support of outside light. That's why it's er makabel. It needs the sunlight. It needs the power of the, like you spoke about, the Einei Eda, the leaders. It needs the teachers, the leaders. It needs the malachim. It needs Torah. It needs the support of other forces to inspire it. But then the neshama, even though it's dark, shcherani, it's beautiful because the neshama's root is higher than all these levels of light. So the neshama in its work below, with its support of this outer light, ultimately we reach a place that's higher than all of it. And that's the Echariya that will come in the future, where it says, that our eyes will see like the sun and the moon, that it itself will become a luminary and actually illuminate everything else. So I would say that the Rebbe Rashab would be coming back to that theme as well. So that's another thing that we need to address after we learn the Torah Er and the Mittler Rebbe and understand Ner Mitzvah Torah Er, and we understand the questions I said needs to still be answered, my thinking is that we then go back and see what does that add to the whole Hariya example. And here too we have help, because that's based on a mimer of the Mittler Rebbe called Ve'neinu Me'ires Keshemesh Yireach, as I pointed out back on page 1352, which is based on a mimer from the Alter Rebbe on the same Dibra Maschil on the Siddur that and we'll address that when we get to that. Okay. Now moving our way backwards. I'm going now to page 1350. As I said, I'm laying out here all the topics and themes that were not finished. Some are very clearly not finished. Some pretty clear, pretty obvious that it's not, but some are extremely clear. The Rebbe Rashab asked questions. So on page 1350, after the 550 pages explaining Mamata Lamaila, the interface from the bottom up, which is through Tefillah, Aramim Chelekai Melech from the bottom up, he went back on 1350. He says, Ma'ata tzarech lahaven inyan ha-Torah. Now we have to understand Torah, which is Hamshach Mamayla Lamata. Because Tefillah is generated from the person below. Torah is a gift that Hashem gave us. He gave us His Torah, where He inscribed Himself in this Torah. That's why Torah is Torah Oir. It's a Oir. Yes, there's a part of it that's Lamat Lamayla when we struggle and when we exert ourselves in learning Torah. But Torah itself is a Mamayla Lamata experience. It's Hashem giving us His Torah and telling us in the Torah what the blueprint for life, including everything we're learning in Chassidus. So he said there, and so he began with that, and we never really got back to Torah. We did talk about the three levels of Hariya and Alavana, and the light of a bright stone, that these are three levels in Torah, Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud. But he didn't really get back to the concept of Torah Eir, which is interesting, because Neshama is compared to a candle. A mitzvah is also compared to a candle, Ner mitzvah, Ner Hashem, Nishmas Adam. It is Torah that's called Torah Eir. So though he began discussing it on page 1350, Eir, that the mitzvah is called Ner, that Torah is called Eir, he asked the question, B'tzarech lo v'mau Ner the Neshama v'Ner the mitzvah. What's the Ner of the Neshama? What's the Ner of the mitzvah? So the Ner of the Neshama he did explain. The Ner of the mitzvah he did not explain, as I pointed out before. Then he adds another thing. On line 7, on page 1350, he asked a question. Gam sarich lahavin, shayin izbar le'il the b'chinas mara adam lamayla. Earlier in Ayin Beis, he explained that the mara adam lamayla, the visage or the likeness of the adam above. Remember, there's adam lamata, adam lamayla, and we were created in the divine image. He said, mara olam zel mash Yisrael olam machshava. That's the vision that God had in His thought. He envisioned neshamas. That's Mara Adam Lamayla. That's he envisioned like the likeness of Adam, the neshamas, as it is Lamayla. Because Ein Sof on its own is not Adam, is not in the structure of Adam. But God wanted a Dira B'Tachtenim, and He wanted a neshama, what He created in the likeness of Adam. Also, the Oyer is higher than Adam. It's not Adam. Because Gilim in the Esem, like we learned about the Oyer, that the Oyer is not yet relating to structure. It's just L'Fi'ef and Esem. So when you say the idea of Mara Adam, you're saying, he says, it's only due to Neshamas Yisrael that you get the structure of a Sir Adam. But without Neshamas Yisrael, it's higher than Sir, higher than structure. Like the image of a child that is engraved and etched in the mind of the father before the child is born, as we learned at length in volume 2. Okay. And he brings that from B'Shem Eir Tereh. in the name of the Magid. So the Rebbe Rashab now asks like this: V'hine hatera nikra gam ken Adam. We know that Torah is also called Adam, not just neshamas. Adam, and he brings from the Zohar Shatera b'chinas sir Adam. The Tzarich Lahavin asked the Rebbe Rashab, Ma'u ha'hefresh l'mayla bein sir Adam the neshamas l'sir Adam the Torah. What is the difference above between the image of Adam, of neshamas, and the image of Adam in Torah? Now again, we could speculate and say in the neshamas come down below and they're darkened, and you don't see that sir Adam. And the neshamas, like the eye, needs the support of a siyua, of outside light, the Torah. The Torah, on the other hand, never loses sight of God's vision. The Torah is always God's vision. That would be the difference. But he didn't spell it out. What I just said is based on what we learned, we can make the difference. And then we can say that Torah, therefore, is supporting and giving the neshama a vision of God's oir, in a way as Atzmus sees it. Whereas the neshama on its own achieves it from the bottom up, or through das tachten, as the divine is within existence. But what I just said is my addition. The Rebbe Rashab never spelled it out. So that's another question that he asked on page 1350 and was not finished. And I would say that once we understand what Ner Mitzvah is, the three things in Ner Mitzvah, once we understand how Shema and Baruch Shem, the Yichud Ilah, Yichud Atah, and their Yichud, create Avin, the animal soul, turning the Shemen, turning the animal soul into oil and fuel for the divine soul. Based on the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe and Mittler Rebbe, we will also come back and understand what Oir Hariyah is and the role of Torah in contrast to the role of Neshamas. What he asks here on page 1350, what is the difference between the two, the Adam, the Tzir Adam of Neshamas, the Tzir Adam of Torah. So we have here Torah, Neshamas, Mitzvah, and all this is going to need to be understood. What is each one's role in this whole process? And of course, understanding that we already learned about Tefillah, what Tefillah's role is, it will also help us understand this picture. Okay, now a few more things, and then I think I've laid out everything that still needs to be covered. Again, any questions? If not, then I'll continue. As I said, I'm working my way backwards here. Next. So before page 1350, as I mentioned, was around 550 pages where the Rebbe Rashab is talking Mamata Lamayla, the Yichud Mamata, the interface from the bottom up. But he made reference to certain things that he said that he's going to explain later, and he didn't explain yet. And they're actually connected to Torah, both of them. So here we actually have more than just a question. We actually have in very short, one line, half a line, that the Rebbe Rashab says something about Torah and says, we'll explain that later. And interestingly here, and I have to point this out, both these places I'm going to now tell you exactly where they are. In both of them, he says, Kamoshi Yisbarach shall be explained, Be'ezus Hashem Yisbarach, with God's help. Now, there are many topics in Ayin Beis where the Rebbe Rashab did not say, he says we will explain it, but he doesn't say with God's help. Not because you don't need God's help, but I'm just thinking the Rebbe Rashab is saying that these two places, with God's help, happens to be two things he never ended up writing about. So maybe the Rebbe Rashab says that he would need extra help that makes sure that he would be able to finish it, but it didn't actually happen. But that's what it says. Two places that I could find in all of Ayin Beis where he says with God's help, and both of them he didn't end up writing about, at least not explicitly. So the first one is on page 1348. At the bottom of 1348, which is 7 lines from the bottom, the Rebbe Rashab says like this. He's speaking about some of what we spoke about before, that there's the vision of the Adam Lamaila, and there's the Adam ala Kisei. How this Adam is sitting on a throne, on a chair. And Kisei, he says from the word Mechusa. kisui, covering. That means, because it refers to Elam Abriya, that comes after the parsa. So therefore, the kisei is referring to the concealment of the Adam ala kisei. So he says that is the hashayich elach. Okay. So he says, Mara Adam Lamailo Mash Yisrael Olu b'machshava. And therefore, Al Kem Hem Esim Tmuna Ba'er K'fi Efen HaKelim Shalahem. So, according to their kelim, being that their structure, they create an image. That's what structure does. It creates an image. But that's the that's shaykh to kelim. Aval etzem shalamayim chilsa kelim ubod bederach v'mayla l'mata. Etzem remember, is higher than kelim, and that comes from the top down. L'mayla l'mata. Eina kelim esim beitmuna. So in other words, when you talk about keli and the keli creates an image in the that's commensurate to the keli, but not the that's higher than it. Like we learned earlier about Negeya. The Aved is Negeya in a place where the relates Malchus. But higher than Malchus, Malchus cannot directly touch. You can open the door, and from there will flow but it doesn't create a direct shinui or ispilus or some impact on that level. Okay. So he says, on the contrary, it's the that dictates what the keli will be like, not the other way around. Just to use an example, when a person, let's say, is creating a piece of art, or let's say even better, sculpture, takes a piece of raw clay and shapes it into a particular structure, a pot, or another piece of pottery. So there, the keli ultimately affects the which means the energy that's invested in it, and they both are commensurate to each other. But there's a level within the potter or within the artist that he's determining what this image is going to look like. It's not determined from below we talked about the potter's wheel. It's determined within his mind, but above. So it's the dictating the keli, not the keli dictating the image of the So therefore he says like this. As shall be explained with God's help in the inyan of Torah. In other words, even though he's talking about Mata L'mayla here, how our Aveda shapes the divine energy above, but there's a level of divine energy that's beyond shape. And that in turn tells us what things are like. It's like we're getting a picture from above what God is about. Not that God is being affected by our image from below and our perspective. Torah is giving us the perspective from above, and that is what defines the kelim. And he says that will be explained later. Now, when you think of what we just read on page 1350, that difference in Mara Adam, what is the difference in Adam of Torah and the Adam of Neshamis? So you already see here, there's two images here. One is the image of Adam Neshamis, and there's the image of Torah, which he calls here coming from above and shaping what is below. But he doesn't explain it. He just says, shall be explained. Everything we learn from here, all the way till the end, you're not going to find an explanation for this. Again, maybe he alludes to it and he hints to it, but definitely not explicitly. So there you have yet another topic that remained unfinished, which I think will also become very clear once we learn, as I said, the Torah, the Mitler Rebbe, and everything that comes with that. Go back, yet another page, where he says a similar idea, going back to page 1486. On 1486, on the line that begins, it's around 10 lines from the top, 3, 6, 9, 10. 11 lines from the top of 1286, sorry. 1286, he says like this. Keli mamshichim esa'er, mashenkin Teira, who amshach esa'er, le masha keli mamshich esa'er. Teira is not like the Aveda from the Mata, it's the not with the keli's mamshich, that's a gift from above Teira. Shezeh b'chinas etzem ha'er, exactly like we just learned on 1348. Ukamoishi Yisborach be'ezus Hashem Yisborach, as shall be explained with God's help. The Milas HaTeira ala Tefillah. So in other words, it says clearly, I'm going to explain the Milah of Teira and Tefillah over Tefillah. Shateira loy mashar keli mamshich, v'loy mashar keli teifus.
So the question is, what is the advantage of Torah over the?
One second, I'm in the middle of a sentence.
I know. I wanted to clarify.
Well, I'm middle of explaining. So he said, very similar to what he writes in 1348, that Teira is different than Tefillah because it's coming from the top down. So what Teira presents us is a perspective from above, which is not what the Keli draws, not what the Keli draws, and not what the Keli can grasp. It's a Mamayla Lamata experience. And he says clearly, I'm going to explain how it's different than Tefillah. This is even more explicitly stating what he's going to be explaining. So here, both these Kamoshi Yisborach have not been explained in Ayin Beis. So it's very clear that these are things that once we continue learning the whole subject matter, we'll be able to go back and understand, or at least as much as possible, understand what would the Rebbe Rashab written on this topic. This reference on 1286 and 1348 are almost the same reference. It says almost the same language. So it's very consistent of something that needs to be addressed. Basically, what is Torah's oir, the oir of Torah adding to the picture that Tefillah and the Neshamas Yisrael and even their mitzvah does not have. So we'll talk about that as well. As I said, we can speculate, but I have no reason to speculate because I believe once we learn the Maimorim, especially Torah and the Mitler Rebbe's Maimer and the Maimer Ve'eneinu Me'ires. I don't know if I'm going to learn that Maimer, but I'll definitely refer to it. We'll get to be able to get answers and at least an understanding of what the Rebbe Rashab intended on saying when he wrote these ideas. Okay. And one final thing. Once we get through that, and that's going to take a little while because there's a lot to learn here, then comes, and let's say we have a pretty clear picture of what I just laid out, and I laid out a bunch of questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think 6 different points. One is the idea why the Yichud allows us to understand how the Nefesh Habamis says, Yesh B'tachlis should be able to come to love God. 2, I'm summing up what I said. The idea of a Ner Mitzvah. What is Ner Mitzvah and what are the 3 things? I'm sorry. 2 is the Neshama. Why is it dafka the power of the Neshama to achieve this type of transformation of the animal soul? 3, what does Ner Mitzvah, the candle of a mitzvah mean, and the 3 components of the wick, the fuel, the oil, and the fire, and the light? 4, the Koyach Hariyah, the Eir Hariyah. What is that? How does that fit into this whole picture? What's the summation of that idea? The next is, what is the meaning of Teira Eir as a difference between Teira Eir and saying that it's Adam, difference between the Adam of Teira and the Adam of Neshamas. And finally, what we just discussed, which is what he says, he'll explain later, that there's an Eir that is generated through the Kalim, and then there's an Eir that shapes the Kalim, or an Eir that comes from the top down, that's higher than the Kalim, and that's Teira. And that's the quality, that's Teira, the mile of Teira, the quality of Teira over Tefillah. So I think once we get the picture of all of that, then I would say, based on at least my understanding of all of Ayin Beis that we have learned, because I don't think there are other topics that remain that the Rebbe Rashab said I'll explain and hasn't explained. I may be wrong. There may be 1 or 2 things he may have referred to. I just don't recall. So I'm going to look more and see if there's anything, but definitely not something that jumps out at me. Then comes how this all ties together, that the Rebbe Rashab would have definitely finished the drush of Ayin Beis by going back to what he said all the way in the beginning, and the 3 meanings of Keser, and then 3 levels within Keser, which is all part of the 3 levels of the interface. So what I'll finally do my plan at least, is after going through all these things and working our way back and like concentric circles, broadening the horizon, the picture, to go back and say, okay, so now how does this all tie together with the initial themes that the Rebbe Rashab began with in the beginning of Ayin Beis, and of course, go through all the themes of Ayin Beis and see them now through the lens of all these ideas that we are now developing, and the yichud, the two levels of yichud, and the yichud of the yichudim, and all the other stuff, all the other material that I just laid out. So we'll have somewhat of a picture, I think, that even though the Rebbe Rashab indeed did not finish writing it, but as I said, he left enough hints and enough signposts, plus the Maimonim upon which Ayin Beis is based, to help us come away with even a broader picture than just finishing where we finished. That's why I'm considering what we're learning now a continuation of Ayin Beis and not just learning another mimer. This is an understanding of how the Ayin Beis themes and how they will all tie together. So that's the lay of the land of the questions that remain unanswered. And as I said, the places we're going to learn to be able to get that clarity. Okay, now, obviously keeping in mind that the central theme of Ayin Beis is interface, the bottom-up interface, is the top-down interface of the two approaches, but also the central themes of going back to volume 1, which also go through 3 levels. Interestingly, the level of the divine that relates to existence, the divine that is beyond, and what he called Alek Atzmus, that's beyond the beyond, that connects the two. We'll see how it all pans out and develops. So with that, I'm going to stop now. If anybody wants to clarify anything or ask anything. The truth is I didn't explain anything. All I did was lay out the things that need to be explained and how we're going to go about it. So I look forward to doing this and really covering this ground and really getting the best possible picture of the whole, this magnum opus called Ayin Beis.
Rabbi, do you mean we're going to go back into the actual Ayin Beis text after we explore some of these other things, or you're
Not
just going
to?
Yeah, okay.
Not necessarily. Mm-hmm. We're going to go through the text of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, and that will help illuminate many of these things. Most of it, the rest I'll probably just refer to things that were said earlier. I don't think we necessarily have to learn it. It's, I mean, when you learn it all, it's 1,477 pages.
Right.
I'm not planning right now to go over all of that, but I have learned it, and we've learned it together, and I'll definitely bring in some pieces of it because it's all part of one large narrative. If you want to get that narrative and understand the bigger picture, even beyond what I will explain, the only way to do it is you should learn it. You can learn Ayin Beis. It's all available from the beginning or wherever you want to begin. And you'll see there's all the different pieces of this magnificent symphony, or you can say, the magnificent mosaic tapestry.
Beautiful. I was thinking yesterday about all the 3 things. So many of it, so much of what we've learned has been, like the Shem, the oil, and what you were just talking about, groups of 3, like the Yehuda Tatan, Yehuda Olam, and then the Yehudim of the 2 others. That 3 seems to be the number that comes up a lot.
Well, 3 is the number of interface. There's 1 and 2, and the interface of the 2. That's why Tiferes, always the Kav Shlishi, Machria. Every morning we say the 2 verses that contradict each other, Ba Kosav Shlishi, and the 3rd comes to reconcile. The 3 is always a symbolic of Shalom, creating peace and harmony between 2 different entities.
Beautiful.
So yes, the 3 is always plays that.
So I was taking copious notes of everything you said today, and maybe if people want, I can share it with them as a guide. You gave it toward the end, summary of the open issues. Actually, I counted 14 issues you identified as being unanswered, but then you summarized them as 7. There was one I didn't quite understand. So just to briefly review, and this is almost verbatim, so let me ask my question after I recite what I have as at least the first five of the summary. So how does the yichud of these yichudim explain how the nefesh Bahamas comes to love God? Why is the power of the neshama what is the power, I guess, of the neshama that enables this transformation? What does ner mitzvah mean, and what are the three elements of that particular mashal of a candle? What is the function of or hariyah? The fifth one I didn't quite get. What is the difference between Torah or and I think that you meant the or of the neshama, or I'm not sure what the final.
The fact that both Torah and neshama are called Adam. What's the difference between the Adam of Torah and the Adam of neshama? It's on page 1350. Ask that question.
I'm sorry. Can you say? Somehow my brain's not working on this one. What is the difference between the tzir of Adam?
Why don't you just write it over? It says, look on page 1350.
Okay.
Look on 1350.
This is all recorded as well. I'll go back. I asked my question.
1350. He asks the question. He says, Mahu. I'm reading on page 1350. He says, Mahu hafresh lamayla ben sir adam the neshamas let sir adam the Torah. That's the Rebbe Rashab's language. Okay. Good. That's good. I'm not sure you got 14, but okay.
Well, I'll share it with you after the class.
Okay.
I think what you did is you took the 14 and you summarized them into 7, but it doesn't matter. I'll share the notes with you later.
I would probably say the other way around. It's probably 7 and you for some reason broke them into 14.
Probably.
But fine, I'm happy to look at it. The ones you just spelled out that's it, and there's only one more after that.
Yeah. Well, there's two more. What is it interesting? The or of the Kalim and the or of Torah, the mile of Torah over the mile of Tefillah, and finally the idea of going back to explaining the 3 levels of Kesser and how do all of the above themes, let's say the first 6 that you relate, how does that tie into the themes initiated at the beginning of Ayin Beis?
Okay, do you have a question? Or does anybody else have any questions on this, what we just reviewed? Because as I said, I didn't really explain anything. I just really laid out all these pieces.
Yeah, but you gave us a roadmap of where we're headed and the questions we have to answer. So
okay,
and in some sense, it was a review of 127 pages, maybe more than that, 1286 to 1477. So basically 190 pages you just summarized.
Okay.
Of the questions just laid out, Rabbi, would you say that any one of them are more essential to the understanding the essential themes of Ayin Beis? Something you prioritize the questions
Not
that way?
Not necessarily. No, it's all part of the picture. I don't see it that way at all. No. I think it's all, I've just really identified things that the Rebbe Rashab had discussed and didn't finish discussing. No, I think they all go together. It's like asking in Ayin Beis itself, the part that we do have, the 1,477 pages, is anything more priority? I mean, there are places that are more, I guess, connecting ideas and themes and central ones. But it's all the whole picture of Chassidus, of the interface between us and God. So I don't know if I would be able to identify one more than other. Okay, good. So my plan is the next class is we're most likely going to start learning Torah, the Maimer Chanukah Maimer. It's called Mika Shem Elokeinu Ma'abiyah L'Shavos. The pages, firstly, are already on the group. We'll always post them again, and we'll learn that. And my hope is from there, to go to the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, which is much more length, that same idea. I don't know if I'll learn all of it. Definitely parts that are Negeya, and there's some, a lot of parts that are very relevant here. and then work our way back, as I said, through the different themes we just discussed now. So it's great. But this is already an effort, just for the record. This is a little, what shall we say? I don't want to overstate the case, but it's a little pioneering, because you don't usually learn in this manner, because this is really a detective work taking together, things the Rebbe Rashab said, and we have to now figure out from the other Maimarim how it would all come together. So it's a certain little more creativity needed here. Obviously, plenty is needed in just understanding what it says. But here we're trying to figure out things that that don't say explicitly by the Rebbe Rashab, but say elsewhere. So, but I feel very excited and confident that we'll do a good job. Okay. So as always, the learning here is an honor. Well, always, as in the last weeks, in honor of our dear and beloved brothers and sisters, men, women, and children, Eretz Yisrael, everywhere. And should I be strong, courageous, try to get beyond any fears, and the Tzahal, those brave soldiers sacrificing their lives for us, should do their job without any casualties and without any pain, and get it done as soon as possible.
Amen.
And may the hostages all be released, and may the world see what is good and what is evil once and for all.
Amen.
Amen.
And it's the whole world now. All the damn anti-Semitism that they always had is coming out now. It's time for Mashiach.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
But we have to be strong in our clarity. The truth is, it's strange to say this, but the more their hatred comes out, and the more the delusional and literally distorted, I would say fabricated narratives, the more, for me at least, is crystallized what is real. When that doesn't happen, you start thinking maybe there is two narratives, maybe this. It's very clear as possible. I've heard some interviews, obviously with the other side, the enemies, that to me becomes so clear, like they created complete false story. I don't just mean about the last few weeks, the whole story of Palestine and colonialization and occupation. I mean, it's wow, that's something else.
Exactly.
Did I tell y'all about being called a dirty Jew at Radiology Associates in Corpus Christi?
No, you didn't mention that.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear.
Yeah, Corpus Christi got called a dirty Jew leaving Radiology Associates Friday.
Well, stand strong. We shall prevail. And it's interesting to me is that, I've seen a few places, but has there been any piece written that really lays out that there was never a place called Palestine, and there is the whole concept is a PR fabrication from the early 60s?
There's something going around on Facebook basically showing that. I'll see if I can send it to you.
Those maps, the fabrication of the maps.
But there's also, go ahead, sorry.
But there's something else. I'll post it. That, I mean, they created a narrative. Yeah, they created a narrative. I say.
The two other things that are interesting. I was just watching an interview with a guy who had defected from the Soviet Union, from the KGB, about how they do this kind of propaganda, and how it's, how they build the narrative over time, and then suddenly it catches. And then the other thing I think is really interesting is that there are some real Arab voices coming out and basically decrying this narrative, which I think is a little bit unusual. People
want to see that guy, the son of Hamas.
Yeah, the Green Prince, and then he's great.
I wish some rabbi spoke like he did.
He's really wonderful. He's so clear-eyed about the whole thing and passionate about it. And then there was some guy on Al Jazeera. How are they dismissing
him? How does the mainstream media dismiss him?
I don't think the mainstream media even discusses him. It's weird.
Well, because they want to, the mainstream media want to tell their narrative, and they're all primarily left wing. So that voice, whatever is not consonant, what doesn't resonate with the narrative they want to say, they exclude it like it doesn't exist. This is not complicated.
Yeah.
And furthermore, this issue of colonization has been, on the left for a long time, even coming back to what us Americans did to the Native Americans. It's all part of the same narrative. And that's, if you will, lahadil, the brilliance of these chayos, these animals, that they work their narrative into this intersectionality so that, they are now the victims of, the Jews are the oppressors. And this is the same story as the gays, the LGBTQ and the blacks, and you name it, whoever claims that they're oppressed group. Now, the Palestinians have managed to insinuate their quote-unquote narrative into these other narratives of the oppressed. And that's why we see, among other reasons, all these people coming out of the woodwork, because they're all supportive of one collective of alleged victims, and they're all fighting against.
I find it so ironic. The Jews are the historical,
of course, the most persecuted people in history. Yeah.
They turned everything upside down on its head. But I think
the Rebbe said there was no anti-Semitism brought out lately because two things: one, sports, and two, that there was people have money. Money's a problem, and I don't know about the sports.
Oh boy. Okay.
These are powerful politics. We can't dismiss it, because this stuff, and I'm being very careful not to use bad words on a recording, but has infiltrated not just academia, because this is now propagating and teaching the next generation of Americans, and at the highest levels. These are kids that are going to go into government positions on Wall Street and all this stuff, and it's infiltrated, of course, the political echelons. The entire Biden administration, if you forgive me, is at least open to this narrative, if not completely part of it. And then you have it in the military now, even with this wokeness being propagated inside our own military. So we can laugh at this. Hold on, Robin, let me finish.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
We can laugh at the absurdity of how they've turned everything upside down.
It's dangerous. It's not laughing.
Well, it's a poison, and this is Israel will overcome this situation, because the Eibishter is protecting Israel, and Nesach Yisrael lo shaker. So I'm not worried about that, but I'm worried that right now their support for Israel in the United States, let's say 3/4 of Americans in general are pro-Israel, and at least half the Democratic Party and 100% of the Republican Party. So I'm getting these numbers 75, 80%, not just from that simple cheshbon, but also from what experts are saying. The problem is that this consists largely of people over 30, and at least a majority, at least half, if not a majority of Americans under 30 are partial. That means they side with this narrative of the colonization and the oppressed. So the problem is, what's the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship in 20 years, God forbid? It's not going to look like it does now. And it doesn't look so great now, although the Republicans, God's willing, take control over the government, meaning to say the three branches, the legislative, the executive, we have the judiciary, essentially. Then hopefully it can begin to guide the country in the right direction. But it's a very terrifying future, not just for what that means for Israel, but what does it mean for American Jews? Because we're comfortable now, but like this Brenda said, the haters are coming out of the woodwork, and I'm very worried.
We're not so comfortable. We're not so comfortable. Look at what's going on.
Also, the politicians have their rhetoric that they need, because as soon as they think the tide has changed,
hold on,
and the rhetoric doesn't show them, then they change their rhetoric.
Let me just stop the recording here. Okay.
Good idea.
We reviewed Ayin Beis. We reviewed the issues and topics that need to be addressed, and I'm going to stop right now here, and we'll begin learning it all through the eyes of the Alter Rebbe's Maimon, Mittler Rebbe Maimon, the next class.